You're listening to What's Ray Saying, the podcast. Let me start by apologizing for being out of touch for such a long time, but a lot of things have been going on and a lot of things I needed to look at regarding the podcast and things I wanted to change. But that's how it goes when you don't have a funded podcast. You still got to put braces on your kids. You still have to drive off the mountain and come back. Still got to feed the chickens, the ducks, the turkeys, the hogs. Still got to slop through the mud, change clothes to drive into town, conduct interviews as part of your dissertation research, just like everybody else. But I apologize. It can be a little bit time consuming. I should make better use of my time. And one of the things I did was to remaster the introduction and the first 4 episodes of the podcast. If you're a familiar listener, I would ask you to give a listen again to the introduction and episodes 1 through 4. And if you're a new listener, then hear them again for the first time. A lot of the background music has been turned down or eliminated for better listening experience, and that was based off of listener feedback, and that should make a big difference. So, give it a listen, and give it a listen again. Now we start.
What's Ray saying? What's Ray saying? What's Ray saying? What's Ray saying?
From the source of all black knowledge, strained, pulled, stretched, yanked, snatched, whipped, and mentally calloused, but still stable. Maybe not tomorrow, maybe not by the end of this episode. You're listening to What's Ray Saying, the podcast. History, stories, and commentary coming up.
Hey friends, this is Christina Wong, performance artist and comedian, and you are listening to What Ray's Saying, the most hardcore, amazing shit you can imagine coming out of the middle of the forest, which is where Ray lives, because he has to speak truth, even from his farm. Peace.
I have heard a number of people say or assert the importance of having immigrants assimilate into American culture as a road to success and acceptance in this country. Now, many groups of immigrants have had their struggles over the decades and the centuries with the lack of social equality and justice. But most of these groups have seen some of those early prejudices broken down. Now, the cultural differences among whites of various European heritages were all but eliminated by the 1900s as ethnic heritage gave way to generic ideas of whiteness. Now, here I'm speaking about the common and not the exceptional. Most Americans who could identify with some ethnic or racial group other than black through most of American history have done so and could find some measure, if not completely, some small measure of equality. Some groups, such as Native Americans, Latinas, Asians, each of which have suffered collectively and individually against racism and bigotry and even genocide individually. Some members of these groups have found it easier or have had an easier path to racial, cultural assimilation, an easier path than blacks, based primarily on their physical appearance. Now, the first step to assimilation is to look the part. A first step many black Americans, by custom and by law, couldn't take. Now, adjusting to white culture for blacks initially took on the form of language and speech patterns. Blacks learned to speak English in the manner they were taught, and to do so later in the manner in which white people spoke to each other. Now, being a native speaker of English can be more than required from many blacks still, as black speech patterns are often subjected to a great deal of social scrutiny. Either you sound black or you sound various degrees of white. It comes up a lot in conversations, or at least people think about it. Black Americans dress in the same general manner and style as white Americans, but we don't look the same. The darkness makes us stand out. The texture of black hair is different. It's different. This is something some of the other groups have in common with people of European descent. I remember when I was in the Army, we were required to have these small tooth combs as part of our display. We had to have them. We had to use them. Every group could use those combs. It made sense for every group to have those combs, except for black soldiers. It's like cutting a part in your hair so you can look more white. Straightening your hair. There's only so much bleaching cream can do for you. You're not going to get completely white, but there are some things you just can't assimilate into. You can't do. You don't even look close to being white. And then there are the issues of those within the black community who do have varying degrees of appearances that might be considered white. But generally speaking, the non-scientific one-drop rule will apply here, and that is any black relative makes you black, and that's where the logic of the whole physical appearance thing doesn't fall into play. Generally speaking, blacks have assimilated into American culture by adopting an American or white philosophy of life, a white or European worldview based on religion, culture, politics, a similar biblical worldview in that most black Americans are Christians or have been orientated toward a Protestant worldview. One path to assimilation by those groups who have been put upon, especially blacks, has been forgiveness. Blacks had their own Truth and Reconciliation Commission long before South Africa, metaphorically speaking, as has always been preached and put forth in the black community, to forgive. When that crazy man killed those 9 parishioners in that black church in South Carolina, one of the first things that those people of that church did was to say, "We forgive him." What a forgiving people. All toward assimilation. Trusting white people, having faith in white people, and giving white people a chance. Nobody can say that black Americans have never done it. Don't do it. But there's always a call for take a little bit more. Some blacks don't give some whites a correct view of what they're feeling about these things, and white people might ignore it. Black Americans can use subterfuge. We can pretend to go along, misdirection, faking it, camouflage, all to assimilate. Some Black Americans use avoidance, and they just stay away from white people. Obviously, this could have some impact on your ability to move about in your social mobility, but some people choose this. Extreme mistrust of whites, a system that denies your complaints, all of this toward assimilation. And there's a shared trauma, a shared humanity. That thing that makes it difficult to hear a baby cry. That thing that makes you want to act. How a scream makes the hair on the back of your neck stand up. That desire, that feeling, others' pain, the things that make you laugh, things that make you cry. Black Americans have empathy toward each other. That shared trauma, our personal stories, the stories of our friends, the stories of our relatives, our parents, our grandparents are a part of us. Their fears are in us. In some people, this mistrust can be magnified. Assimilation. How long will it take? How long has it taken? Black Americans, for the most part, have lived in this country for hundreds of years, still speaking the language, still having problems, still having struggles despite the successes, trying to assimilate.
I'm on your mind, and then you falling in love, If you see me in your eyes, I will see me in yours. You're away.
There was a story I told that was featured on the Martha Radio Hour and in Reader's Digest. This was about an experience with racism I had as a young Boy Scout. I was about 11 years old. What I did not talk about in that story is the response the Black Scoutmasters had to the situation. The Scoutmasters' response to the discrimination and persistent breaking of the rules against Black Scouts was quite curious. When I first went to the Scoutmaster and informed him that I was being required to do more than the other Scouts to pass the swimmer test, he said nothing. When I came to him and told him I was slapped in the face by a white Scoutmaster and made to get out of the pool, he took me to the side. Out of the presence of everybody, he grabbed me by the arm and he yelled at me, "The hell is wrong with you, boy? What did you do?" I cried. I said, "I didn't do nothing. I knew nothing. I just swimming in the pool just like everybody else. I have the swimmer badge." "You shouldn't have been in that pool then. You know how them white folk is. What'd I tell you? Were you in that pool trying to show off?" "No, sir. I was just, you know what I told you. Yes, sir. Don't you say nothing. Did anybody say anything to you? No, sir. On the various occasions that I was denied the privilege of utilizing boats or canoes or participate in water activities, even though I was qualified to do so, the Scoutmaster was mostly concerned that I didn't complain to anybody. I would tell him what happened, and his next question is, who else did you tell? What did you say? Did you talk back to him? No, I didn't, but they told me I couldn't. Good. Don't you talk back to nobody. Maybe you ought to stop going down there and asking to participate. But I said, we were told that we could. He said, no, what did I tell you, boy? We're the only black troop here. Don't you ever start no trouble. What you do reflects on all of us. Do you understand? I told you we'd be watched. And he told me, as he told the other boys, if anything happened, if there was any incidents, come to him first. Come to the Black Scoutmasters first. And I, as did the other boys, thought to myself, well, certainly this is because they will handle it. He will handle it. The blacks will look out for blacks. But what it really turned out to be was to block us from saying anything we were not coached to say in the presence of whites. As the only black scout with a swimmer badge, the troop was required to put me up to participate in a mile swim merit badge event. Despite the fact I was denied the chance to practice 5 consecutive times in a row, I had no idea of my strengths, my weaknesses, to feel the texture of the water, or what I could expect, or the course. Well, despite the fact I overcame the bigotry and the fear that I experienced at the Boy Scout camp, I did persevere, and I did, as the story goes, complete the mile swim. And as I say in the story, I was the first black Boy Scout to earn that badge at that camp jamboree. But after the telling of that story, I heard from another number of people who read or heard the story of my complete the mile swim and informed me that this is what other blacks should do. Ignore the past. Ignore bigotry and racism. Don't complain. Just work hard. You can succeed. Put your nose to the grindstone. The normalization of a racist world.
When you're calling, 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 that means I'm on your mind. And then you're falling, 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 falling in love, in love. If you see me in your eyes, I will see me in yours. You're a worth. You're worth. Calling, calling, calling.
What does assimilation even mean to a lot of people? One of the things I've heard is speak English first. How about speaking English well or good or decently? Because some of the most aggressive people I hear making comments like this, they sound like they could not have even completed a single English course in this country in high school. Don't separate yourselves. Be American. Now, for black people, what does that mean exactly? Be more white? Be as white as you can? While white Americans can celebrate their European heritage all the time, in fact, there are major celebrations around the country for Polish Americans, Irish Americans, Italian Americans. But blacks? Oh no. You can be an American. Well, half an American. But so to the point that even the smallest social spaces for African Americans, those small spaces they've set aside for themselves, are vilified. As for some whites, they must have knowledge of the activities of blacks at all times. For some people, finding pride in the everyday existence is hard, and the pride demonstrated by other groups who are not white is seen as offensive. Despite hundreds and thousands of monuments, streets, buildings, and celebrations that celebrate, commemorate the accomplishments of white Americans all over the nation. For some, the advancement of one minority group is a step backwards for them. How can we ever go forward if people keep trying to take us backwards? Now, if anyone is thinking that an era of white supremacy will ever return to this country, for this one man, you are mistaken. If you put your hand in my social and cultural dog bowl, I will bite you and sink my teeth into the meat and gristle of your damn hand every time. Okay, this one is done. This podcast is completely self-funded. That means it doesn't have any money. In fact, it loses money. It costs me money. This is a love podcast. But hogs have to be fed. I still have to spend money out there feeding animals. And if you want to support this podcast, just go to the website and click the donate button or use PayPal. So we'll see how long this podcast can survive on love alone. I look forward to your comments, your feedback. Check us out on Twitter. Follow us on Facebook. Let me hear from you. I need to hear from you. But more importantly, share the podcast. Really, share the podcast. Tell your friends. I need those downloads. I need to know you're out there. This podcast is produced by me, with help from Dr. T, and original beats from the always amazing Beach Gordy Brooks. Special thanks on this episode to my dear, dear friend, Christina Wong. Until.
You have been listening to What's Ray Saying, the podcast, hosted by Ray Christian. You can find What's Ray Saying on iTunes, Facebook, and Twitter. If you've got comments, questions, or feedback, you can always reach us via Facebook or by emailing whatsraysaying@gmail.com. Ray says each episode is made with love, fatback, chicken feed, and fresh mountain spring water, but none of these are legal tender according to the electric company. To help this listener-supported podcast pay the bills and keep producing episodes like the one you just heard, you can click on our Donate tab on Facebook or go to paypal.me/whatsraysaying. Tell a friend or 2 or 12 or 20 what you just heard on What's Ray Saying, the podcast. Until next time.
What's Ray saying? What's Ray saying? about